For 6 days, he didn't eat. Not because he was sick, not because something was wrong with the food, because his brother was gone. And nobody had understood until now what that actually meant to him. When the carrier door finally opened in that kitchen, Cairo stepped out slowly, one paw, then another. He stopped, looked across the floor, and then he made a sound, small and quiet, like someone who's been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been told they can put it down. This is the story of a shelter worker who drove 3 hours on her day off because she refused to look away. If stories like this matter to you, you're in the right place. Welcome to Paws and Whispers. Subscribe so you never miss one. The shelter had a rhythm to it. Anyone who spent more than a few days inside those walls came to know it. The way a person knows the creak of their own floorboards, or the particular sound their kettle makes just before it whistles. It started before sunrise, keys jangling at the front door, fluorescent lights blinking on one by one down the long central corridor, then the morning feeding rounds, the soft chorus of meows, the occasional bark from the dog wing, the slow parade of potential adopters who came in smelling of hope and left carrying cardboard carriers, or sometimes nothing at all. The rhythm was steady. The rhythm was reliable. And for most of the animals inside, the rhythm was enough. For Cairo, it had stopped making any difference at all. He was a small cat, even by kitten standards. Pale gray, with a faint darker stripe along his spine. Paws that seemed slightly too large for the rest of him. And eyes the color of shallow river water on a cloudy morning. The staff had named him Cairo because, as one volunteer had remarked during intake, he had the look of something ancient and patient about him. Something that had been waiting a very long time, and had made peace with waiting. That observation had seemed charming at the time. Now it felt like a warning nobody had taken seriously enough. For the first several weeks after his arrival at the Millbrook County Animal Shelter, Cairo had been unremarkable, in the best possible sense. He ate well, he groomed himself. He tolerated handling with a gentle compliance that made him easy to work with. He was not the most playful cat in the intake wing, nor the most affectionate, but he was consistently calm. And in a shelter environment, calm was a gift. What the staff had perhaps not fully appreciated was the reason for that calm. It was not temperament. It was not contentment. It was Riven. Riven was Cairo's brother, born from the same litter, brought in on the same gray Tuesday morning, tucked inside the same fleece-lined carrier. Where Cairo was quiet and watchful, Riven was bold and restless, always the first to investigate a new sound, always the one pushing his nose into corners and batting at shadows. They were opposite in almost every visible way, and yet they functioned as a single unit, with such seamless coordination that the staff had simply stopped thinking of them as two separate animals. They ate from the same bowl without conflict. They slept curled together, like a question mark and its answer. When one was lifted for handling, the other pressed against the side of the enclosure and watched, with an expression of polite but firm expectation, until the first was returned. Always together. That was what the intake coordinator had written in the notes. Not as a formal behavioral flag, not as a separation warning, just a small observation. 2 words long, tucked at the bottom of a shared intake form, always together. The adoption happened on a Wednesday afternoon in early October, when the light outside had turned that particular shade of pale gold that feels like the last warmth before a long cold. A woman named Patricia came in looking for a single adult cat, and left, after 2 hours and considerable deliberation, with Riven. She had chosen him for the same reasons most people chose Riven. He came to her. He pressed his head into her palm. He purred before she had even made up her mind. Cairo had sat at the back of the enclosure and watched. The staff member on duty that afternoon had noted that the separation had gone smoothly. Cairo had not vocalized, had not tried to interfere, had simply sat and watched his brother carried out through the door, and then had turned to face the corner of the enclosure, with the composed stillness of something that had always known this moment was coming. By the end of the first day, the staff had decided he was adjusting well. By the end of the second, they were less certain. By the end of the fifth, when they placed his food bowl directly in front of him and he did not lower his head to eat, when he did not flinch or flick an ear or offer any sign that he had registered the presence of food at all, the concern that had been building quietly in the background moved to the front of the room and refused to be ignored. And by the sixth morning, when Elowen Harrow arrived for her shift and walked past Cairo's enclosure and stopped, because something in the particular quality of his stillness made her stop, the situation had already gone further than anyone had wanted to admit. He was sitting in the same spot he had occupied for most of the week, facing the door, not the enclosure door, the large door at the end of the corridor, the one that led to the outside world. His food bowl sat behind him, untouched. Elowen stood in the corridor for a long moment, her jacket still half unzipped, her coffee thermos warm against her palm, and she looked at him. And then, unlike most people who had passed that enclosure in the last 5 days, she did not keep walking. Elowen Harrow had worked at Millbrook for 3 years, long enough to have developed a practiced resistance to the particular kind of heartbreak that shelter work generated on a near-daily basis. She was not cold. Nobody who lasted in that work for any real length of time was truly cold. But she had learned, as most of them did, to process grief quickly, to feel it and then set it aside in the functional manner of someone who understands that there is always another animal waiting for the same quality of attention. She was 41 years old, short dark hair she kept tucked behind her ears, the same style of soft-soled shoes every day, because she had learned early that animals responded better to quiet footsteps. She was good at her job, patient, observant, and she had an almost inconvenient tendency to notice things that other people categorized as background noise. Cairo was background noise, except that he was not. She went back to his intake file that morning, pulled it up on the office computer, her coffee still warm beside her, the shelter beginning to hum with the sounds of the morning routine. She read through the medical notes, the behavioral assessments, the vaccination records, standard, all standard. And then, at the bottom of the shared intake form, she found it. Always together. 2 words. No further explanation, no formal notation, no behavioral recommendation, no separation protocol flag, just those 2 words. Written by someone who had observed something true, and had not known quite what weight to give it. Elowen sat back in her chair. She thought about the way Cairo always oriented toward the main corridor door. Not the door to the outdoor enclosure, not the door to the treatment room. The specific door that led to the entrance hall, which led to the outside, which was the direction Riven had been carried when he left. She thought about the fact that he had accepted small amounts of food only when a staff member sat with him, never alone. She thought about the note, always together. She picked up her phone. The call to Patricia, Riven's adopter, was meant to be routine. A standard follow-up, the kind the shelter made to all adopters in the first weeks. She had made hundreds of them. They were usually brief and reassuring on both ends. This one was neither. Patricia's voice, when she answered, carried the particular texture of someone who had been managing a quiet worry for several days, and was relieved to have a reason to speak it aloud. "I was actually thinking about calling you," she said, before Elowen had finished introducing herself. Riven was not settling. He had space, he had warmth, he had Patricia's considerable patience and affection. He had a dedicated corner of the living room furnished with a plush bed, a climbing structure, and more toys than any single cat could reasonably investigate. He had everything a cat was supposed to need. What he did not have was Cairo. He sat in front of doors, Patricia said, not asking to go out, not restless in a way she could interpret, just sitting, watching, as though waiting for something to come through. He ate, but without enthusiasm. He slept, but in shorter stretches than seemed natural. He accepted affection, but did not seek it the way he had during his time at the shelter. The way he had pressed his head into Patricia's palm and convinced her, quite thoroughly, to bring him home. "It's like he's here," Patricia said carefully. "But he's also somewhere else." Elowen wrote down what she heard, and then sat quietly at her desk for a moment after the call ended. 2 cats, 3 hours apart, both sitting in front of doors, both waiting. She walked back to Cairo's enclosure that afternoon and crouched down to his level, resting her forearms on her knees, and she looked at him for a long time without saying anything. He did not look back at her. His gaze was fixed on the corridor door, with an expression that Elowen, who was generally careful about projecting human feelings onto animal behavior, found very difficult to describe as anything other than grief. She tried the things that were available to try. A new toy, soft and filled with dried herbs, was placed near him. He did not investigate it. His blanket was replaced with a fresh one that carried no particular scent associations. He ignored it. A calm, older cat from the adjacent enclosure was introduced carefully, at a distance, just to see. Cairo did not respond with aggression. He simply turned his attention back to the door, with the gentle patience of someone who has already made up their mind about what they are waiting for. That evening, Elowen stayed late. She was reviewing paperwork in the office when something made her get up and walk back to Cairo's enclosure one more time. The shelter was quieter at this hour. The day staff had gone. The overnight volunteer was somewhere in the dog wing. The fluorescent lights gave everything a slightly flattened quality, all shadows the same depth. She turned the corner into the cat corridor and stopped. Cairo had pulled his blanket across the enclosure floor, slowly, the way cats will sometimes drag fabric with their teeth, until it was pressed against the front of the enclosure. Against the gate that faced the corridor. Against the direction of the door he watched every day. He was lying on it, facing out, waiting. Elowen stood in the corridor and felt something shift quietly inside her chest, the way things sometimes shift when you have been looking at a problem from the practical side for too long, and suddenly the human side of it comes through. She drove home that night, with the radio off. The conversation with her supervisor the following morning was not easy. Millbrook County Animal Shelter operated on a structure that prioritized practical outcomes, which was not unreasonable, given the realities of shelter management. Resources were limited. Decisions were made by precedent and protocol. Animals were expected to adjust. That was not cruelty. It was simply the mathematics of the situation. And Elowen understood the mathematics as well as anyone. But mathematics, she had come to believe, was not always the complete picture. She sat across from her supervisor, a practical woman named Dorothea, who had been managing shelters for nearly 20 years and who had a great deal of respect for Elowen's instincts. And she made her case. Cairo was not adjusting. He was not in medical distress in any way that could be formally documented, but he was declining in a manner that, left unaddressed, would become a medical problem within a relatively short period of time. He was eating only when assisted, and only in small amounts. He had ceased most normal activity. He was showing no interest in environmental enrichment of any kind. "And you think the solution," Dorothea said, "is to reunite him with the adopted cat?" "I think the solution is to talk to the adopter about the possibility of taking both cats," Elowen said. "And I think that conversation needs to happen in person, because this situation is unusual enough that a phone call isn't going to communicate what needs to be communicated." There was a pause. "That's 3 hours each way?" "I know." Dorothea looked at her for a long moment, with the expression of someone doing a quiet calculation. "You'd be doing this on your own time?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "You genuinely believe this cat is declining because of the separation?" Elowen thought about Cairo lying on his blanket at the gate. She thought about the 2 words at the bottom of the intake form. She thought about Riven sitting in front of doors in a comfortable house 3 hours away, waiting for something that had not yet come through. I believe, she said carefully, that some bonds are structural, that they are not preferences or habits, but something more fundamental than that. And I believe that Cairo has one of those bonds, and that the absence of it is doing real damage. Dorothea was quiet for a moment. All right, she said finally, but document everything. If this works, I want it on record as a model for how we handle bonded pairs going forward, starting with the intake form. The drive took Elowen through a landscape that had given itself over fully to autumn. The highway moved through stretches of forest where the trees had turned every shade between yellow and deep rust. The sky above them was the soft, undecided gray of early November. She had Cairo in a transport carrier on the back seat, secured with the seatbelt threaded through the handle. And for the first hour of the drive, he did not make a sound. Somewhere past the midpoint of the journey, on a long, straight stretch of road with flat fields on either side, and the sky pressing low overhead, she heard him shift inside the carrier, and then she heard him sit up. She glanced in the rearview mirror. He was upright, facing forward. "We're going the right way," she said quietly. She was not entirely sure why she said it. It was not the kind of thing that could be verified by a cat in a carrier on a highway in November. Cairo did not answer, but he also did not lie back down. He remained sitting, facing forward. And there was something in his expression that Elowen chose, with full awareness of her own sentimentality, to interpret as the look of someone who has just realized they are heading in the right direction. Patricia's house was at the end of a gravel lane that cut through a small stand of trees. It was the kind of house that looked like it had grown there rather than been built. Low and warm, with a deep porch and window boxes that still held the dried stalks of summer flowers. The trees around it had gone bare at their tops, but retained their lower leaves, a patchwork of orange and brown that filtered the afternoon light into something soft and amber. Elowen pulled the carrier from the back seat and set it on the gravel for a moment while she got her bearings. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp leaves and the particular earthy sweetness of late autumn soil. Inside the carrier, Cairo lifted his head. He took one long breath through his nose. And for the first time in 6 days, Elowen saw his ears move forward. Patricia met them at the door with the expression of someone who has been quietly worried for long enough that relief and anxiety have become difficult to distinguish from each other. She was a woman in her late 60s, white hair pinned loosely at the back of her head, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She had the kind of warm, direct presence that animals tend to respond well to. "He's in the kitchen," Patricia said quietly. "He heard the car. He's been in the kitchen since." She led Elowen through the hallway. Elowen carried Cairo's carrier at a low angle, moving slowly, not wanting to rush anything. They paused at the kitchen doorway. Riven was standing in the middle of the kitchen floor, with the very specific posture of a cat who has made a decision about something but has not yet acted on it. He was facing the hallway. His tail was still. His ears were forward. His entire body had the compressed quality of something waiting for confirmation of what it already knew. Elowen set the carrier down on the kitchen floor and unlatched the door, but did not open it. She stepped back. Cairo was visible through the mesh of the carrier front. He was pressed against the door, not frantically, not with the desperate energy of an animal in distress, just present, fully. In a way he had not been present for almost a week. His nose was working. His eyes were wide and fixed on the cat standing in the middle of the kitchen floor. Patricia had gone very still beside Elowen. Nobody moved. Riven took one step forward, just one, slow and deliberate, the way cats move when they are being careful with something important. And then he stopped. Inside the carrier, Cairo made a sound. Not loud, not the distressed vocalization of an animal in crisis. Something smaller and quieter than that, more like the sound a person makes when they have been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and have just been told they can put it down. "Oh," Patricia whispered. so softly it was barely a word. Elowen reached down and opened the carrier door. Cairo did not rush out. He stepped forward slowly, one paw, then another, onto the kitchen tile. He stopped just outside the carrier and sat for a moment, as though steadying himself. Or perhaps as though allowing the full reality of where he was to settle properly. Riven had not moved. The two cats looked at each other across 3 feet of kitchen floor, with the focused, unguarded attention of creatures who have found something they had stopped expecting to find. It was Riven who moved first. He walked forward until he was close enough to reach, and then he stopped and lowered his head, in a gesture that was partly greeting and partly something that did not have a clean human equivalent. Cairo stretched his neck forward. Their noses touched. They stood like that for several seconds, and then, with the unhurried certainty of animals who have resolved something, they pressed together, flank against flank, and were still. Patricia made a sound beside Elowen that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and was entirely understandable. "Look at that," she said. Elowen looked. Cairo, who had not moved with purpose or interest for 6 days, who had sat in the same place and stared at the same door, and refused food and ignored toys, and spent the better part of a week performing a kind of careful, dignified, disappearing act, turned his head toward the food bowl that Patricia had placed near the far wall. He walked to it. He sniffed it, and then he ate. The sound of a cat eating is not, under ordinary circumstances, a remarkable sound. It is small and practical and tends to blend into the background of domestic noise. But in that kitchen, on that afternoon, with the amber autumn light coming through the window and Patricia pressing a hand against her own heart, the sound of Cairo eating was one of the most complete things Elowen had heard in a long time. Recovery was not immediate. It would have been a more satisfying story if it had been. If Cairo had walked into that kitchen and eaten a full bowl and then stretched out on the cat tree and been, from that moment forward, entirely himself again. But animals, like people, do not work that way. There were days when Cairo still paused at closed doors, his head tilted slightly, some echo of the long wait still present in his body. There were mornings when he was slow to come for breakfast, standing back and watching the bowl, while Patricia simply placed herself nearby without fuss until he decided the bowl was worth approaching. But he ate. Every day, he ate. And that consistency was the foundation on which everything else began to rebuild. Riven had adjusted with remarkable speed. It was as though the presence of Cairo had unlocked some resource of contentment that had been there all along, waiting for the right conditions. He began using the cat tree. He began sleeping in longer stretches, deeply, curled in the particular loose way that indicates genuine rest. And he began sleeping with Cairo. Not always, but on most evenings, in the quiet hour after dinner, when the house settled into its nighttime rhythm, and the wood stove clicked softly as the metal cooled. They could be found together, sometimes on the padded bench beneath the window, sometimes in the basket near the hallway radiator, sometimes simply on the couch, occupying the same cushion with the uncomplicated ease of animals who have no reason to keep their distance. Patricia found herself rearranging her routines around them. She had lived alone for 7 years, since her husband had passed quietly in the winter following his retirement, and she had believed herself to be reasonably well settled into solitude. She had her garden and her books and her small circle of neighbors, and she was not unhappy. But she had also, she now recognized, been maintaining a particular stillness that was different from contentment. A kind of careful management of the empty spaces in the house. The cats changed the quality of those spaces, not dramatically, not in a way she could have predicted or even fully explained, but the house was different now, in the way that a room is different when a window has been opened. Not louder exactly, but more alive, more attended to. She found herself talking to them the way she had once talked to her husband while he was reading, not expecting a verbal response, but wanting to put something into the air of the room. She called Elowen in the 3rd week to report on their progress. Cairo ate from the bowl by himself this morning, she said, without me sitting next to him. He just walked up and ate. There was a small silence on the other end of the call. That's good, Elowen said. That's very good, Patricia. He also sat on my lap for about 10 minutes yesterday evening, Patricia added, which he has never done before. He has always been more reserved than Riven, but yesterday he simply climbed up and sat. What did you do? I stopped breathing for a moment, Patricia said honestly, and then I kept very still, because I did not want to frighten him off. And then I read my book with one hand and kept the other one on his back, very lightly, and he stayed. For 10 minutes. For 10 minutes. Elowen was smiling, though Patricia could not see it. I think he trusts you, Elowen said. I think, Patricia replied thoughtfully, that he has decided it is safe to try. Back at Millbrook, things were also changing, if more slowly. Elowen had written up the case in full and submitted it to Dorothea with a detailed proposal for a revised intake protocol. The proposal called for a formal bonded pair designation to be applied during initial assessment, with a separation advisory attached to any adoption that would divide a bonded pair. It was not a prohibition. It was simply a system by which anyone considering adopting one animal from a bonded pair would receive clear, documented information about the bond before making a decision, and would be given the option to adopt both. Dorothea had read it carefully, made a number of practical notes in the margins, and approved it for implementation. The intake form was revised. Always Together became the first entry under a new behavioral section titled Bonding Notes, accompanied by a protocol flag that would appear every time anyone pulled up the records of either cat in the pair. It was not a sweeping change. It was not the kind of thing that would make headlines or transform the landscape of shelter management in any broad and visible way, but it was real, and it was specific, and it had come from paying attention to two words that someone had written carefully, and then allowed to drift to the bottom of a document. In November, Patricia sent Elowen a photograph. It arrived by text message. Elowen opened it while she was eating lunch at her desk. The photograph showed the bench beneath the sitting room window, and on the bench, arranged in the loose, unconscious symmetry of animals who have been sleeping next to each other for long enough that they have started to mirror each other even in rest, were Cairo and Riven. The afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle, the way November light does, long and amber and slightly hazy. Cairo's face was turned toward the camera, his pale eyes soft and half-closed in the particular expression of a cat that has made peace with where it is. Riven was pressed against his side, fully asleep, one paw extended across Cairo's flank, in a gesture that was either accidental or entirely intentional, depending on what you chose to believe. The house was visible in the background. A reading lamp with a warm bulb, a stack of books on a side table, the corner of a knitted blanket, a wood stove that was clearly lit, a space that had been made for living in. Elowen looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she forwarded it to Dorothea with a single line of text. The protocol is working, and she went back to her lunch. And the shelter continued its rhythm around her. Doors opening and closing, footsteps in the corridor, the sound of water in bowls, and the small voices of animals making themselves known. And somewhere inside all of that ordinary noise was the quiet fact that one cat had been seen, and one woman had paid attention, and the road between what was and what could be had turned out to be exactly 3 hours long. Some bonds cannot be explained by the logic of preference or habit. They are older than those things. They are written into the animal before it has a chance to choose. And when those bonds are broken, the damage is real, even when it is quiet, even when it does not show up on any standard assessment form, even when it looks from a distance like nothing more than an animal being slow to adjust. Cairo had not been slow to adjust. Cairo had been waiting, and the only thing that had ever been wrong with that was that nobody, until one early morning in a fluorescent-lit corridor, had taken the time to understand what he was waiting for. What some creatures need is not a new start in a different place with different people who will try very hard to do everything right. What they need is simpler and more specific. And when you find it and give it back to them, more extraordinary than almost anything else, they need to go home.